Trust is the foundation of every marriage. But what happens when that trust is shattered by what seems like undeniable evidence? When Rachel Henderson confronted her husband James on the Family Feud stage in December 2024, she was certain she had caught him in a lie that would end their marriage. The bank statements, the secret meetings, the unexplained absences, everything pointed to one devastating conclusion. But what Rachel didn't know was that the truth was far different from what she had pieced together. And when the full story finally emerged, it would leave Steve Harvey in tears and prove that sometimes our worst assumptions blind us to the most beautiful truths. If you believe in the power of truth and second chances, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share the Family Feud moments that remind us why jumping to conclusions can be the biggest mistake we ever make. The Henderson family from Nashville, Tennessee walked onto the Family Feud stage with an undercurrent of tension that was palpable to anyone paying attention. James Henderson, 45, was a high school music teacher with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. His wife Rachel, 43, was a real estate agent known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense approach to business. Their two teenage daughters, Madison and Emily, stood between them, clearly uncomfortable with the strained silence that had replaced their parents' usual banter. Steve Harvey noticed immediately that something was off. Rachel barely looked at James. When Steve asked them how long they'd been married, James answered 20 years, with warmth, but Rachel's 20 years too long was delivered with ice in her voice. The audience laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke or a warning. James's sister Patricia, who completed their family team, shot Rachel a concerned look. She knew what her sister-in-law suspected, and she knew the truth that James had been desperately trying to keep hidden until the right moment. But Patricia also understood why Rachel's suspicions had hardened into certainty, and she feared what would happen if the truth came out in anger rather than love. Rachel Henderson had always prided herself on her instincts. In real estate, reading people and situations correctly was essential to success. She could spot a lie, sense when clients were hiding financial problems, recognize when a deal was too good to be true. These same instincts had served her well in life, helping her navigate difficult situations and protect her family. So when she started noticing irregularities in their joint bank account 3 months ago, every alarm bell in her mind started ringing. Withdrawals of $500 here, $300 there, always in cash, always with vague explanations from James. School expenses, he would say, or I needed to help a student with something. But the amounts were too large and too frequent for those explanations to make sense. Then came the secretive phone calls. James would step out of the room when his phone rang, speaking in hushed tones. Rachel had heard fragments of conversations. I can't talk about this now. It's not a good time. She doesn't know yet. Each overheard phrase fed her growing suspicion that her husband was hiding something terrible. The late-night meetings were the final straw. Twice in the past month, James had claimed he needed to attend emergency faculty meetings at the school. But when Rachel casually mentioned these meetings to another teacher's wife, she learned there had been no such meetings. James had lied about where he was going. Rachel's mind went to the darkest place, an affair. It was the only explanation that made sense. The money was for gifts or hotel rooms. The phone calls were with the other woman. The late nights were time spent with her. Every sign pointed to infidelity, and Rachel's heart broke a little more each day as the evidence mounted. She considered hiring a private investigator, but decided against it. She didn't want photographic proof of her husband's betrayal. The circumstantial evidence was damning enough. She thought about confronting him directly, but feared he would just lie more skillfully. So she decided to wait for the Family Feud taping, thinking that perhaps in that public setting, with their daughters present, James would be forced to face the truth. What Rachel didn't know was that James had indeed been keeping a massive secret, but it had nothing to do with another woman. 6 months ago, during a routine physical exam required by the school district, James's doctor had found an irregularity in his blood work. Further testing revealed that James had a rare kidney disease that was slowly destroying his kidney function. Without a transplant, he would need dialysis within the year. James had been devastated by the diagnosis, but his first thought wasn't for himself. It was for Rachel and the girls. Rachel's father had died from kidney failure when she was 16. James knew that telling her about his condition would trigger all that old trauma, all those memories of watching her father deteriorate on dialysis. He couldn't bear to put that weight on her shoulders until he absolutely had to. So James had made a plan. He would quietly get himself on the transplant list and explore living donor options without worrying Rachel. The cash withdrawals were for copies and medical tests not fully covered by insurance. The secret phone calls were with doctors, transplant coordinators, and potential living donors. The late-night meetings were support group sessions for people awaiting transplants. Patricia knew because she had been tested as a potential donor. She was a match, and they were in the process of scheduling the transplant surgery. James had planned to tell Rachel on their 20th anniversary, which was just 2 weeks away. He had wanted to present her with the good news, that he had a condition but that it was being handled, that Patricia was donating a kidney, that everything would be okay. But James hadn't anticipated how his secrecy would look to his wife. He hadn't considered that Rachel's investigative instincts would turn inward, examining his behavior and finding patterns that led to the worst possible conclusion. He thought he was protecting her. She thought he was betraying her. The Family Feud appearance had been arranged months ago, before James's diagnosis, as a fun family activity. Now it felt like walking into an ambush. Patricia had tried to convince James to tell Rachel the truth before the taping, but James insisted on sticking to his plan. He didn't want to ruin the show for their daughters, and he was so close to the anniversary reveal he had planned. What neither James nor Patricia had fully grasped was just how hurt and angry Rachel had become. The woman standing on that stage wasn't just suspicious. She was convinced she had been betrayed, and she was done staying silent. The game progressed through the first round with mounting tension. Steve Harvey, sensing the undercurrent of conflict, kept making jokes to lighten the mood, but the strained smiles from the Henderson family told him something serious was brewing beneath the surface. Then came the question that would crack everything open. Name something a husband might hide from his wife. Rachel was at the podium. Without hesitation, her voice sharp and loud, she answered, "An affair." The audience reacted with surprised murmurs. Steve's eyebrows shot up. But before he could respond, Rachel continued, turning to face James directly. "Because that's what my husband is hiding from me, isn't it, James? The secret phone calls, the cash withdrawals, the lies about where you've been. I'm not stupid. I know what's going on." James's face went pale. "Rachel, no, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Rachel's voice broke with emotion. "I understand that for 3 months you've been lying to me, sneaking around, taking money out of our account, meeting someone you won't tell me about. What am I supposed to think?" Madison and Emily stood frozen, tears streaming down their faces. This was their worst nightmare playing out on national television. Steve Harvey held up his hand, signaling the producers to cut to commercial, but then he reconsidered. Whatever was happening here needed to play out. "Rachel," James said desperately, "please, not here, not like this." "Why not here?" Rachel demanded. "You clearly don't respect me enough to be honest with me in private. Maybe public humiliation will finally get you to tell the truth. Are you having an affair?" "No," James's voice was anguished. "Rachel, I swear to you I am not having an affair. I have never been unfaithful to you, not once in 20 years. "Then what are you hiding?" Rachel's anger was giving way to raw pain. "Why are you lying about where you're going? Why are you taking money and refusing to explain what it's for? Why are you having secret phone conversations?" Patricia stepped forward, her voice urgent. "James, you have to tell her. This has gone too far. Tell her the truth right now." James looked at his daughters, at his sister, at his wife's devastated face, and realized that his plan to protect Rachel had instead destroyed her trust in him. There was no romantic anniversary reveal anymore. There was only damage control. "I'm sick," James said quietly. "I've been sick for 6 months, and I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you." Rachel's anger froze into shock. "What?" "I have a kidney disease," James continued, his voice breaking. "It's progressive. I need a transplant. All the money I've been taking out, it's for medical bills. The phone calls are with doctors. The meetings are transplant support groups. I wasn't sneaking around with another woman. I was trying to handle this without putting you through what you went through with your father." The studio had gone completely silent. Rachel stood frozen, trying to process what she was hearing. Her mind was reeling, trying to reconcile months of suspicion with this completely different truth. You're sick." Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. Patricia spoke up. "I'm donating one of my kidneys to him. We've been planning the surgery. James wanted to wait until your anniversary to tell you everything, that he was sick but that it was going to be okay, that he had a donor, that the transplant was scheduled. You were going to tell me on our anniversary that you've been dying for 6 months. Rachel's voice rose again, but now it was fear and hurt rather than anger. "How could you keep something like this from me? How could you go through this alone?" "I watched your father die from kidney failure," James said, tears streaming down his face. "I watched what it did to you. I saw the nightmares you had for years. I couldn't bear to put you through that again until I had good news to balance the bad. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" Rachel's voice broke completely. "You let me think you were cheating on me. I've spent 3 months believing my husband was having an affair. 3 months dying inside, questioning everything about our marriage, wondering what I did wrong. You think that was protecting me? Madison and Emily were sobbing openly now. Steve Harvey, who had remained silent through this exchange, finally stepped forward. His face showed the emotional weight of what he was witnessing. Hold on, Steve said gently but firmly. Both of you need to take a breath. James, you were trying to protect your wife from painful memories. Rachel, you were trying to protect yourself from what you thought was betrayal. But what's happened here is that good intentions and understandable fears created a situation where nobody was actually talking to each other. He looked at James. Brother, I understand why you didn't want to tell your wife about your illness. You were trying to spare her pain. But keeping something this big from your partner, that's not protection, that's isolation. You took away her choice to support you. You took away her right to be there for you during the scariest time of your life. Steve turned to Rachel. And Rachel, I hear your pain. I hear that you've been living in hell thinking your husband was unfaithful, but now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Rachel looked at her husband, really looked at him, for the first time in months without the lens of suspicion clouding her vision. And she saw what she had been too consumed by her assumptions to notice. James had lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond normal tiredness. All the signs she had interpreted as evidence of an affair suddenly took on different meaning. The secretiveness wasn't guilt about another woman, it was the burden of carrying a health crisis alone. The cash withdrawals weren't for hotels or gifts, they were for medical copies. The hushed phone calls weren't romantic conversations, they were discussions about treatment options and transplant logistics. You've been going through this alone, Rachel said, her voice trembling. For 6 months you've been terrified and sick, and you've been handling it by yourself because you were trying to protect me. James nodded, unable to speak. Rachel's anger dissolved into anguish. She crossed the stage in 3 steps and threw her arms around her husband, holding him as they both broke down. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm so sorry I jumped to the worst conclusion instead of just asking you directly. I'm sorry I kept it from you, James said into her hair. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was just being a coward. I was so scared of putting you through what you went through with your dad that I didn't stop to think about what my secrecy was doing to you. Madison and Emily joined their parents, the 4 of them standing in a tight circle of grief and relief and love. Patricia wiped tears from her own eyes, grateful that the truth had finally come out even if it hadn't happened the way anyone planned. Steve Harvey addressed the audience, his own voice thick with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, this right here is why communication matters. This is why we can't make assumptions. This is why we have to ask the hard questions instead of filling in the blanks with our worst fears. He looked at the Henderson family. James, I want you to understand something. Your wife is stronger than you think. She survived losing her father. She would survive supporting you through this illness. In fact, she deserves the chance to be your partner in this fight instead of being protected from it. James nodded. You're right, I see that now. I was so focused on sparing her pain that I didn't consider that shutting her out would cause a different kind of pain. Steve turned to Rachel. And Rachel, I need you to hear this too. Your instincts were right that something was wrong. But jumping to the conclusion of infidelity without gathering more information, that almost destroyed your marriage for the wrong reasons. When you suspect something, you have to create space for honest conversation instead of building a case in your head. Rachel pulled back from James but kept holding his hands. I was so sure, she said. All the evidence pointed to an affair. I never even considered that there could be another explanation. I let my fear of being betrayed blind me to the possibility that my husband was struggling. Fear does that, Steve said gently. Fear makes us see what we're afraid of instead of what's actually there. Both of you were operating from fear. James feared hurting you with bad news. Rachel feared being betrayed. And that fear almost cost you everything. Patricia spoke up, her voice steady despite her tears. I want to say something if that's okay. James asked me not to tell Rachel about the kidney disease or the transplant. He made me promise to keep his secret. And I did because he's my brother and I wanted to respect his wishes. But watching Rachel suffer these past few weeks, knowing what she suspected, I should have spoken up sooner. I should have told James that his secrecy was hurting his wife. She looked at Rachel. I'm sorry I didn't. I'm sorry I let you believe something so painful when I knew the truth. Rachel reached out to squeeze Patricia's hand. You were trying to honor your brother's wishes, I understand that, but you're right, sometimes love means speaking up even when it's uncomfortable. Madison, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. Her voice was small but clear. Dad, why didn't you tell us either? Emily and I were not babies. We could have helped. We could have been there for you. James looked at his daughters with fresh tears. I didn't want you to be scared. I didn't want you to look at me differently, to treat me like I was fragile. I wanted to be your strong dad for as long as possible. But we knew something was wrong, Emily added. We could feel the tension between you and Mom. We heard her crying at night. We saw how you were pulling away from all of us. Dad not knowing was scarier than knowing would have been. The weight of this realization settled over James. His attempts to protect everyone he loved had instead isolated them all in their separate fears and suspicions. His daughters had been scared, his wife had been devastated, and he had been carrying his burden alone when he could have had the support of the people who loved him most. Steve spoke to the family as a whole. Here's what I want you all to understand. Families are strongest when they face challenges together. Not when one person tries to shield everyone else from difficulty, but when everyone is honest about what's happening and supports each other through it. He looked at James specifically. Your kidney disease is serious, but you're getting a transplant from a living donor. That's incredibly fortunate. But more than the medical outcome, what matters is that your family is facing this together now instead of being divided by secrets. The Henderson family never finished their family feud game that day. Instead, they spent the next hour in the green room, talking honestly for the first time in 6 months. James explained every detail of his diagnosis, his treatment plan, and the upcoming transplant surgery. Rachel shared how the secrecy had affected her, how each unexplained absence had fed her worst fears. Madison and Emily asked questions about the medical procedures, about what recovery would look like, about how they could help. The conversation was difficult and emotional, but it was also cleansing. The family that had been fracturing under the weight of unspoken truths began to knit back together through honest communication. When the episode aired, the producers chose to include the full confrontation and resolution, turning it into a special hour-long episode about the importance of communication in marriage. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of viewers reached out to share their own stories of jumping to wrong conclusions, of keeping serious health information from loved ones, of how assumptions had damaged their relationships. Medical professionals used the episode in patient education, showing how James's well-intentioned secrecy had created more harm than good. Marriage counselors incorporated it into their practice, using the Henderson family's story to illustrate the danger of making assumptions without verification. 2 months after the taping, Patricia donated her kidney to James in a successful surgery. Rachel was by her husband's side throughout the procedure and recovery, finally able to be the supportive partner she had wanted to be all along. She took a leave of absence from her real estate work to care for James, and their daughters rearranged their schedules to help at home. The experience transformed how the Henderson family communicated. They established a new rule: no more protecting each other from difficult truths. If something was wrong, they would share it. If someone was struggling, they would ask for help. The transparency sometimes felt uncomfortable at first, but it created a foundation of trust that was stronger than before. Rachel grappled with guilt over her accusations of infidelity. In therapy, she worked through why she had jumped to that conclusion so quickly. Her therapist helped her understand that her investigative instincts, which served her well in business, had turned inward and created a narrative based on incomplete information. She learned to distinguish between pattern recognition and assumption. I kept finding evidence that fit my theory, Rachel explained to Steve Harvey during a follow-up interview 6 months later. But I wasn't looking for evidence that might contradict it. I wasn't asking the right questions. I was so convinced I knew what was happening that I stopped being curious about what might actually be true. James also did his own work in therapy, examining why he felt the need to be the strong protector who handled everything alone. He discovered that his fear of burdening others stemmed from childhood experiences with a chronically ill parent. He had watched his mother shield his father from worry, and he had internalized the belief that showing vulnerability was weakness. I thought being a good husband meant never letting Rachel see me scared or struggling, James shared. But what I learned is that real strength is in being honest about your fears and trusting your partner to handle them with you. Rachel is incredible. She could have handled my diagnosis from day one. I robbed her of the chance to support me because I was too proud to admit I needed support. The transplant was successful, and James's kidney function improved dramatically. But both he and Rachel agreed that the real healing happened not in the operating room, but in the conversations that followed the family feud confrontation. They had to rebuild trust that had been damaged, not by actual betrayal, but by the isolation that came from keeping secrets and making assumptions. Madison and Emily processed the experience by writing an essay together for their school newspaper about communication in families. They wrote about how their family had nearly fallen apart because everyone was trying to protect everyone else, and how they had come back together through difficult but necessary honesty. We learned that love doesn't mean shielding people from hard truths, their essay concluded. It means trusting them to be strong enough to face those truths together. Our family is closer now than we've ever been, not because we've avoided difficulty, but because we've learned to face it as a team. Tricia reflected on her role in the situation, recognizing that keeping her brother's secret had put her in an impossible position. I was caught between respecting James's wishes and watching Rachel suffer, she said. Next time, and I hope there never is a next time, I would tell James that I can't keep a secret that's actively hurting someone I love. Steve Harvey remained involved with the Henderson family's journey, checking in periodically and celebrating milestones in James's recovery. A year after the transplant, he invited them back to Family Feud for a redemption game where they could actually compete without the weight of secrets and suspicions. This time, when the question came up, name something a husband might hide from his wife, Rachel's answer was different. His feelings, she said with a knowing smile. Because men sometimes think being strong means not showing emotion, but real strength is vulnerability. It was the #1 answer. The audience erupted in applause, understanding the journey this family had taken to reach that moment of wisdom. The Henderson family's story became a teaching tool about the importance of verification before accusation, about the danger of well-intentioned secrets, and about the power of choosing truth over comfort. Relationship experts used it to illustrate how the same evidence can support multiple interpretations depending on our underlying assumptions. For couples struggling with trust issues, the Henderson story offered a crucial lesson. When you suspect something is wrong, the answer isn't to build a case based on circumstantial evidence. The answer is to create safety for honest conversation. Rachel's mistake wasn't in noticing that something was off. It was in deciding what it meant without giving James the chance to explain. And for those facing serious challenges like illness, the story demonstrated that protecting loved ones from difficulty often backfires. James's secrecy about his kidney disease created more pain than the diagnosis itself would have caused. The people who love us want to support us through hard times. Denying them that opportunity doesn't protect them. It isolates everyone. 2 years after the initial Family Feud appearance, on what would have been their 22nd anniversary, James did give Rachel the presentation he had originally planned. But instead of revealing the kidney disease, he gave her a memory book documenting their journey through his illness and recovery. It included photos from the transplant surgery, letters from their daughters, and entries from Rachel's journal during his recovery. I wanted to give you good news without bad news, James wrote in the book's introduction. But what I learned is that facing bad news together creates a bond that good news alone never could. Thank you for being angry with me when I deserved it. Thank you for forgiving me when I needed it. Thank you for choosing to believe in us even when I gave you every reason not to. Rachel's response was simple but profound. Thank you for finally trusting me to be strong enough for both of us. That's all I ever wanted. The Henderson family continues to share their story at marriage retreats and communication workshops. They speak candidly about how assumptions nearly destroyed them, how secrets created division where there should have been unity, and how choosing truth over comfort ultimately saved their marriage. What began as an accusation of betrayal on a game show stage became a powerful testimony about the importance of communication, the danger of assumptions, and the healing that becomes possible when we choose truth over fear. The Henderson family didn't win $20,000 on Family Feud that day, but they won something far more valuable. They won back the trust and transparency that make a marriage truly strong. If this story reminded you to verify before you accuse, to communicate before you assume, and to trust before you suspect, please hit that like button and subscribe. We share these powerful Family Feud moments because they teach us that the truth, even when it's difficult, is always better than the stories we create in its absence.